Hello, writers, and welcome to the Author Burnout Coach, the show where we put the publishing industry and all sorts of societal messaging under a microscope. I'm your host, Isabel Sterling, YA author and certified life coach. In each episode, I offer you specific steps that you can take to break up with burnout and reclaim your love of stories. I'm on a mission to dismantle the bookish hustle culture, one writer at a time. I hope you'll join me. Hey writers, welcome to episode 26. I have something a little different for us today, given the general fuckery of the world, which I'm not going to get into. If you follow this, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Because of that, and just the trash fire that is the United States government currently, and all of the things, I want to sort of step back a little bit, and instead of just talking about why writing is hard and all of the reasons writers so often struggle with burnout and feeling like they need to hustle all of the time, I wanted to also give a little airtime to the other side of the equation. And I will review some of the reasons why writing is hard, because I do want to validate that, yes, it is hard. But also, we're going to talk about why it's important to be a storyteller, if that's what you feel called to do, why it's fun, and why it's worth going through all of the effort and all of the drama to actually do it. So first, I want to give a quick overview of why writing really can be hard. Of course, we know the model is thinking something is hard is truly a thought, but for the purposes of this, I want to just offer that we can think of it like a circumstance. We can say that it is factually hard if it's helpful to think of it that way. It's hard and it's worth doing. It's hard and I still like it. It's hard and I can do hard things because I'm a badass. So it can give us something to sort of say like, yes, that is true. And also this other thing is true. And therefore I'm going to continue going down this path of being a writer. So here are some of the reasons, certainly not all of them, why writing can be hard. So first off, novels are huge and they are multifaceted and the brain can only hold so many things at once. So it is a huge project, tens of thousands of words, of course, depending on what you're writing and what age group. If we're thinking picture books are just a couple of hundred words max, and then of course, we have our big, sweeping, epic fantasy novels that are over 150, 200,000 words. They're a little bit like, those are like, man, I'm talking the big thick boys. They're real long. But a lot of them tend to be, especially if you're writing like YA, tends to be in the sort of like 60 to 100 kind of range. Either way, that is a lot of stuff. And there's so many different layers within a book. There's the character stuff. There's what you see. There's foreshadow for later. It can also be really challenging when you're trying to balance, like I had to do with The Coldest Touch, was I had to make it a standalone that had the potential to have a sequel should there be demand for it if we sold enough copies. So trying to get something that felt complete in one book, but then also still had enough threads left open to have a really interesting sequel. If there are any of you listeners who are also readers, there are currently no plans for a sequel. So I just want to put that out there. But I left certain threads open so that I know I could explore them in future books if I wanted to. But I also wanted to make sure if you only ever got that book, that it would still be very satisfying. And that shit is hard. It is hard to have something that is so satisfying and yet could so easily lead to more books. Also, writing is hard because it's not just one skill. Writing a novel is not one skill. It is dozens and dozens of skills built on each other. There are all of the technical skills, things you might have actually learned sort of growing up and like, in middle school and high school. Things like how to construct a proper sentence and avoid run-ons and how to properly punctuate dialogue and all of those sort of like technical pieces. But so few of us are actually taught how to tell a story. And that is a whole separate slew of skills. So there's skills in how to properly build a world, how to properly incorporate backstory and foreshadowing, how to ensure everything you do in your book has a purpose and has meaning. What we do as writers And part of what makes it, so challenging is if we give something to the reader, we are sort of making this promise that it matters. So the things that don't matter much, we don't put a lot of emphasis on, we don't put a lot of detail into, because we don't want to incorrectly signify that it's important if it's not. Other reasons why writing is hard, in addition to the dozens of different layers of skills, and maybe we'll do a whole podcast on what some of those different skills are, because there are very many. Things like character arcs and sustaining tension and pacing, like all of those are unique skill sets. Again, it's not just writing a book. That's not a skill in and of itself. It is a collection of skills. The other part of what makes writing hard is that novels are a marathon of effort. Even the first draft, depending on your speed of writing and just sort of everything you have going on, this could be something that you do over the course of weeks, months, or years, just the first draft. And then that's just step one. Now you have to edit it. And again, that's another weeks, months, years, depending on how much time you have available to spend and the knowledge base you already have and the skill sets you already have. So this is a long time on one project. And if you're in traditional publishing, the time from starting a project to it being on shelves and being sort of this tangible thing that people can interact with. And by people, I don't mean like critique partners. Of course, you can send them Word documents and things, but like the general public, that literally takes years. Like when I think about These Witches Don't Burn, wrote the first draft of that in 2015, came out in 2019. That is a 4-year period. Of course, I wasn't only working on that all 4 years. There was times when it was being queried or on submission where I was doing other things or time in between deadlines. So I wasn't actively working every day for those 4 years, but it's still 4 years from sitting down to write the first few lines to being able to show my parents like, hey, look, I did an actual thing. You can go to the store and buy it. So not only is it a marathon, but the industry is not a meritocracy. Just because you write a really good book doesn't mean that it's going to get traditionally published. And if you indie publish, does not mean it's going to find an audience. And this can be really frustrating for new writers and also veteran writers who've been in this game a long time, even within their own career and their own sort of books. Like I can see that, just because The Coldest Touch, my most recent book, is by far my best of my 3 books, that is not reflected in the sales. Nothing is ever truly just based on the merit of the work. And when we look in publishing, we see very clearly how marginalized authors face additional barriers. There's the, implicit and explicit racism and homophobia and transphobia within the industry and within the general readership. And then there is also, when we think about all of the ways that systemic oppression affects people, it also impacts the ability to have the time and space to actually write and hone that craft. Because again, it can take years. It is harder for some people than others, often depending on some of the different privileges or marginalizations they have, to actually carve out years of their life to work towards something, to learning this skill. So there's lots of barriers there. And just that can be so demoralizing. Writing is also hard because it pits us against so many of our internalized issues. When you're trying to do something as big as writing a book, something that I feel like almost everybody has an opinion about, this is where we start to really run up against perfectionism and imposter syndrome. And we start to think, is it worth it to put in the time? Like, shouldn't we be giving our time and attention to our kids or to our spouses or to our communities? Like, why am I spending all this time on me and something that isn't a guarantee? So all of that can make it hard to be able to really get in there and finish book after book and grow your skills to get published. Also, this industry is so good at trying to convince us to conflate our success of our books with our worthiness as a human. Those are separate things, but it is so easy to conflate them. I think most writers that I know have struggled with that at some point, myself included. If you've listened to more than one episode of this podcast, you know burnout and hustle culture, huge part of this industry. So that can make it really hard to thrive. Also, art in general is very devalued in capitalistic societies, again, like the US. We get a lot of this, art should be just done for the love of it. And if you're wanting to get paid, you're selling out, like all of those kind of messages really devalue the importance of what we do. Okay, but that was a lot of time spent on sort of all of the fuckery of writing and why it's hard. But I just wanted to take a moment to include those things because I don't want this podcast to be a denial of the ways that it's hard, because it is hard. And so if you're struggling to write, whether it's your first book or you're multi-published and you're working on book 5 or 10 or 15, if it's hard and you're struggling, I want you to know that it is genuinely hard. So of course you have moments where you struggle. And that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you, and that doesn't mean that you should quit, and that doesn't mean anything negative. It is part of the process. That said, some of the ways it's hard are things that we can mitigate. And that is, again, the whole purpose of this podcast is there's lots of different ways that we have been taught by society, and then we sort of recreate for ourselves that make writing harder than it has to be. But also, when we focus so much just on this first half of why it is hard and we ignore the benefits of it and we ignore why we do it and we ignore the sort of beauty of it, it's so easy to get lost in the why it's bad when we ignore those things. I want to really talk about a very incomplete list of why writing is amazing and why it's worth doing, and why when the world is on fire and when it's all just total fuckery, why writing is truly so important. And I actually really encourage you to write your own list. Why do you love writing? How does it help you? How does it help your community? Why is it so important? And it doesn't all have to be big capital I importance. It can just be the fact that it is fun and it is delightful. That is also important. So here are some of mine. So first, books can help us feel less alone. It can help our readers feel less alone, especially when we're writing about, marginalized identities that we hold, that we can find that kind of connection with other readers. But it also helps us feel less alone when we can connect with other writers and we can connect with ourselves and with our characters. It gives us this sense of this is where we belong. These are our people. This is where we fit. Now, I will acknowledge that again, the world is kind of on fire and all sorts of people want to write books, including people who are very actively bigoted. So not every writing space, by virtue of it being a writing space, is going to feel like your writing space. But there is always somewhere a space where you can create belonging with other writers. I truly believe that. I truly believe that there is a space for all of us to find belonging and to find our people who we can connect to and sort of have that community. Which, thank you for the internet, because that has been a very helpful way for me to do that, and for many of you, I'm sure, as well. All right. Another reason why writing is so cool. When you can successfully translate something that is in your head that exists just as feelings or images or a sense of like an energy, which is sort of like how I tend to think of my books, is just sort of this like feeling, because I don't have a very visual inner mind. And you take that and you put it onto the page and you translate it there, and so that it exists outside of you. That is like a form of magic. It is like this ability to use words to cast a spell over your readers and create something in them that used to exist in you. That is really cool, especially as you get published and your books start to filter out past just you and your friends and family and past your like critique groups and those kind of things, and get out into the wider world to people who you've never met. That you can create emotions in another human being through the words that you've written down. Like, that is really fucking cool. I want to have you sit with that for a second, whether you have books that are published or whether you're still new and you haven't yet. And I want you to, if that's you, kind of imagine a future where people are reading your books and they're seeing themselves in some way, and they're able to feel sort of these emotions that, of course, they're creating. We know the model, they're creating it because of the thoughts in their head, but you are giving them some ideas of thoughts to have in their head. So you're in essence sort of a conduit for those emotions. Another reason why writing is really amazing is there's nothing quite like committing to write a novel that is going to push you into personal growth and evolution. Because writing is so hard, In order to get through to the end of a book, there is so much inner work that you have to do to allow yourself to show up to the page again and again and again to get all the way to the end. You will not be the same person when you start a novel and when you finish a novel. You are not the same person. You have had to grow in order to achieve that. And I find that's true with each of my books. Every time I write a new book, it forces me to think in new ways and grow in new ways and grow my belief in my ability to tell stories and to tell the next level or layer of storytelling. If you have self-doubt that you want to work through, a great way to do that is to write a book, because every self-doubt thought you've ever had will come screaming to the surface. And then, in which case, it's very helpful to have a life coach there to help you process those feelings and thoughts so that you can get past them and continue writing your book. Writing can also be magical and amazing because it can be very healing work to be able to work through issues you have experienced or are currently having on the page. In my most recent book, The Coldest Touch, each of the main characters, it's a dual point of view. Each of them sort of holds a little seed of something that I struggled with growing up. So, for example, my vampire character, Claire, she's in this place where she feels very alone and very used and very like people only want to talk to her if she can do something for them. And though I've had some really amazing friends, and it's not at all a reflection of them, it was very much my own mind issues, but that was very much how I felt. I felt very alone through a lot of my middle school and high school years, and even into college too, where I just felt like nobody really liked me. They just liked what I could do for them. Which again, my friends were amazing. This is not at all a reflection on them. This is just my own internal nonsense that was creating that experience for me. But being able to sort of transform that from my experience and sort of giving that to Claire, that was part of what allowed me to step out of it and sort of see how I was creating that for myself. Because part of what happens with Claire is she believes that, and she has lots of evidence for that. That is also partially self-created because she's always looking for evidence of that. So she's always finding evidence. So even though Elise really cares about her and isn't using her, Claire always sees that she's being used. And then on the other side, my Death Oracle character, Elise, one of the things she struggles with is that she loses a brother. Her brother dies before the start of the novel, and though I've never lost a sibling, that was like a huge anxiety fear that I had. Gosh, probably since I was like 10. I was always terrified that I was going to lose a sibling, like all of the time. And I don't know exactly why, but that was a huge part of my growing up and just being so afraid of that. And again, no rational reasons why. Thank you, anxiety. But being able to give that fear and give that fear a voice in Elise and sort of have somebody have to go through it in Elise, that helped a lot of, one, giving some emotional truth to her character because I had spent so long being afraid of that and being able to transfer that emotion to her. So it was helpful for me. It sort of creates good resonance within the novel, and hopefully it then is resonant for other people who read it as well. Okay, some other reasons why writing is really worth doing and is magical and fun. And this is something I want to speak specifically right now to the debut writers, to all of the trad published folks who feel a little bit jaded and who are like, oh, I got another deadline and I'm working on this book that's not coming out until like 2057. Slightly joking, but like we're always way in the future. We forget how magical it is to walk into a bookstore and see our books on the shelves. Now, if we think back a little bit to the episode I had with Mara and Christine, not every bookstore carries our books. That is part of what can make it challenging as a writer to sort of lose bookstores as a safe space. But the fact that we can do that for some, if not all of our books, if we can walk in and there's our book on a bookshelf, not only in our town, but across the country and in some places across the globe, that is really fucking cool. And we forget that. We get so jaded to that. We forget, we walk into a random indie and our book isn't there and we feel defeated, and we forget just the fact that it could have been there. that was even possible, that it might have been there. That in and of itself is really amazing. And it's something that so many people dream of and so few achieve. And as we become friends with more writers, we start to see everybody having that and sort of everybody in our periphery, and we forget just how rare and amazing it truly is. So to my debuts and my multi-published peers, I want you to kind of go back to the first time that you saw your book in a bookstore and just how magical that felt. And let that be there in your body for a moment. And if if you're not published yet, or you're indie published and you don't have this experience, you can sort of think about any other sort of big moment you've had, and just sort of let that sink in. Like, it is really amazing to do that and have the ability to then have impact on readers. So the readers can feel less alone when they see themselves in your pages, or they see, even if it's not, their exact identity or anything, but they see an emotional experience that they resonate with, that has happened for them. The details might be different, but if the emotions are there, that can make someone feel so much less alone. We also get to reach hearts and minds in places we've never been, in languages we don't even speak. I just got an email this morning from somebody in Germany who really enjoyed The Coldest Touch and wanted to reach out. I hear from a lot of folks in sort of the Spanish-speaking parts of the world who love my books. I get to reach people in places that I don't get to go, like physically, and that's really cool. And then finally, I want to leave us with this week. The world is going to shit, and everything is a dumpster fire, and rights are being stripped away from people. Writing can be an act of resistance. I've done the whole getting involved in local politics thing. I did a lot of stuff in 2020 and 2021 with that. I served on my local city council for a few months when the previous person had to step down for maternity leave. I ran for public office and lost by like 10 votes. Like, I've done the things. And while I'll always still be engaged in sort of my civic duty of voting and doing that kind of stuff, politics is not where I'm going to dedicate my life's work. That it's not where I can be of highest service to the world. Writing is how I do that. I can make the most change and do the most good by telling stories that center queer joy and center queer people when there's all of this hate in the political climate and danger. I just saw something about trying to make it illegal to be an adult trans person in some fucking state here in the US. And when that shit is happening, my biggest contribution, the thing where I have the most power and the most sustainable power, and this is really important, and I want to focus on this just a minute before we wrap up. Creating lasting change is being able to advocate for it sustainably. When things happen and we all get enraged, and then we are feeling like we have to be spending every second trying to fix things, that is a recipe for burnout. So for me to be so trapped in being upset about what's happening and getting caught honestly in like a nervous system shutdown, like where it's like when I get into that spin, my whole body goes into like a freeze response. If you think about like fight or flight, and there's also freeze and fawn sort of responses when your nervous system gets activated. When I go to that place where I think about what it might mean for the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade and the other rights that they want to roll back and all of that, when I think about that, my whole system just shuts down and I can't do anything. And that is not helpful to anyone. But when I can find a couple of things that I can do to help, and then I can remember that my biggest source of being able to help is in telling stories and changing hearts and minds through the act of writing stories and publishing books, that is something that I can do for the next 50 years. The sort of intense panicking and scrambling to try to fix things, that is not 50 years of ability to do that. So it's both and. We need all kinds of people who have all kinds of talents to tackle these issues from different facets and from different angles. And my personal angle is writing my books and coaching other writers to help them write their books. All right. So with all of that said, if you find yourself stuck in all of the ways that writing is hard, I want to invite you to make a list of all of the reasons that writing matters. It can be so easy with the state of the world to think that it doesn't matter, that it's pointless, that it's not going to actually help, but it does. So even if you don't have readers yet, I want you to write a list of all of the reasons that writing matters to you right now. And why might it matter to your readers in the future? Why is it important that you take the time to work on your novel? Because I promise you it is important. Like I've said, writing is hard, and you can absolutely find a way to do it on your own. I believe that for each and every one of you. But just because you can do it alone doesn't mean you have to. You can grow your skills faster without the need for hustle and burnout with the support of a book and life coach like yours truly. Plus, it's way more fun when you have someone walking with you side by side through the entire process. So if you want to work with me, the outro is going to tell you how to reach out, and then you can set up a consult and work with me. All right, until next time, friends, happy writing. Ready to break up with burnout? I can show you how. With my unique blend of book and life coaching, I help writers craft stories they love, all without the imposter syndrome and perfectionism that gets in the way. Go to isabelsterling.com/coaching to learn more and schedule your free consultation. Until next week, happy writing.